Welcome back to World Cup history. My name is Lavender Bai, and you are going to want to sit down for this one because we are talking about arguably one of the greatest World Cups in history. It's 1954. We are in Switzerland, the home of FIFA, and it's the miracle of Bern, baby. Our next episode kicks off in Bern, Switzerland. It's July 4, 1954, and we are at the Wankdorf Stadium. It's rainy, which means the pitch is rather muddy, but we'll get back to that. So in the West German dressing room, there is a cobbler from a small town in Bavaria. This guy isn't a doctor, he isn't a coach, but he had been traveling with the West German team throughout the tournament, sitting right up close next to the coach and meticulously making adjustments to boots mid-game, like some sort of shoe magician. A shoedini, if you will. His name is Adi Dassler, and his new invention of metal screw-in studs for football boots was about to make football history. We will eventually get into a full episode on Adi and the Dassler family because, hoo boy, there is a lot to unpack there. But let's park that for now and get back to the original story. In the tunnel, the Hungarian squad is getting ready. They are unbeaten in 31 matches. They have scored 25 goals in this tournament alone before the final even started. Just 4 years earlier, they humiliated England 6-3 at Wembley, being the first continental team to ever beat England on home soil. And just 3 weeks earlier, they beat this West Germany team 8-3 in the group stage of this very tournament. They weren't just the favourites. It was virtually unthinkable that West Germany would even stand a chance. Basically, West German fans came into this game just simply hoping that the team would avoid another humiliating defeat. This is the story of the 1954 World Cup, one of the greatest in the tournament's history and one that altered the course of football forever. Sit down and buckle up because this story has everything you'd expect from a fairy tale. There's a cobbler, there's a communist regime, there's meth for some reason, and an upset that would be remembered forever. This is the miracle of Bern. So Switzerland was awarded the tournament way back in 1946, the same day that Brazil got 1950. They were the only European nation that could afford to host it. They were the home of FIFA, and being Switzerland, most importantly, neutral. No threat of another Mussolini situation happening this time. They had 8 years to plan the thing, and thank God, because this tournament was huge. 16 teams, 26 matches, 140 goals. That is 5.38 goals per game, which is still the highest goals per game average in World Cup history. Nobody has come close since. Like I said earlier, there is a genuine argument for this being one of the best World Cups in history. The scorelines looked like mistakes. Hungary 9-0 over South Korea, Austria 7-5 over Switzerland, and then there is the final, which we will get into. The other important thing to note is that this is the first World Cup ever broadcast on live television.
Apparently, I've never been on live television before.
Thanks to Eurovision. No, not the song contest, no ABBA here, but the television network that allowed 8 countries to watch live football on their tiny black and white televisions. If you were in Belgium, Denmark, France, Italy, the Netherlands, Switzerland, the United Kingdom, or West Germany, you had a chance of watching it. Not the whole world, not even most of Europe. Just 8 countries, many of them still getting used to even owning a TV. Luckily, one of those countries was West Germany, and what happened when Germans watched their team on television for the first time matters enormously to this story. So who was actually there? Germany and Japan are both allowed back in FIFA after their post-war ban was lifted. Only West Germany actually play a part in this story. East Germany hadn't entered, having cancelled international football after the 1953 workers' uprising. Then you've got Saarland, a French-administered territory of German-speaking people, which entered separately. This is the only World Cup they would ever compete in, and to be so real with you, I had no fucking idea this place even existed until I started researching this video. They were eliminated in qualifying, and 3 years later, they rejoined West Germany and ceased to exist as a separate entity. Also competing at this World Cup was Scotland, who were there for the first time. They qualified for 1950 and refused to go because they finished second in the home nations rather than first, but it appears this time they swallowed their pride because they came second again and decided to go anyway. Smart move from the Scottish, if you ask me. And for the first time, Asia had a guaranteed spot at the tournament. And boy, was the qualification here a hot mess. So the end of World War II also saw the end of the occupation of Korea under Japanese rule. And the Korean War had only ended 8 months before qualification began. So when South Korea and Japan had to face off, things were obviously going to be quite tense. South Korean President Syngman Rhee had just spent decades fighting Japanese colonialism and wasn't too fond of the Japanese as a result. He flat out refused to give Japanese players visas to enter the country. They would not set foot on Korean soil under any circumstances. FIFA ultimately decides to host both legs of the home and away qualification in Tokyo, which means the Koreans have to travel for their home game. Japan entered this as the undeniable favourites. They had professional international football experience nearly 2 decades before Korea even had a team. They had a federation, they were playing regular games, and of course they had the home advantage. They were overwhelming favourites. On the other hand, South Korea needed to catch multiple flights and have military transport to even make it to the games. But they had spirit. The Korean coach reportedly told Syngman Rhee, "We will beat Japan. If we do not, we will all throw ourselves into the East Sea." And somehow, the football gods were on their side. Korea won in Japan and they were headed to their first World Cup. And then there is the strangest qualification story of the tournament. Spain and Turkey finished level in their group despite Spain being overwhelming favourites. They go to a playoff in Rome and are still level after extra time. And because it was 1954 and penalties weren't a thing, FIFA went to the drawing board to find a winner. You're going to want to sit down for the solution. So the solution is to, get this, pick out a 14-year-old Italian boy named Luigi Franco Gemma, the son of a stadium worker, blindfold him, and then get him to pick a name out of a hat. Insanity. So he pulls Turkey and Spain are out. And that is just the chaos of qualification. The tournament hasn't even started yet. So to fully understand the significance of this tournament, I need to first set the scene of 1954 Germany. Bear with me, I know this podcast has somehow ended with me talking about World War II in every single episode, but leave me alone, I'm a history nerd, okay? It's important. So it's 9 years since the war ended, and Germany is literally split in two. The Berlin Wall wouldn't go up for another couple of years, but the Iron Curtain had been drawn. So Germany had emerged from the Second World War humiliated, broken, and quite literally divided. West Germany, who we are going to focus on for this story, was materially getting better. The Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle, was at its peak in the 1950s, with exports doubling, the GDP growing by 8% year on year, and the purchasing power of wages growing by 73%. By 1953, the industrial output had returned to pre-war levels. But while that may sound good on paper, things were psychologically getting worse. Those stats sound great, and they were great comparatively, but the sentiment in West Germany was not. The people were defeated. The shame of the Nazi regime cast a humiliating shadow on the population, so bad that most did not want to identify with being German at all. Denazification was incomplete and imperfect, with Nazi officials still holding various public office roles as the country tried to rebuild itself. Now, this isn't to say that denazification didn't work. In many ways, it actually did benefit society, like look at the Nuremberg trials. But in Germany, there was a strong sense that nobody wanted to talk about what had just happened. This is insane to me. Imagine going through all of that and then just like sort of trying to return to normal. It was sort of brushed under the rug. You couldn't sing the national anthem even 9 years after the war ended. And showing any kind of patriotism was still extremely complicated. The economy was thriving, but as the fiscal future of the country blossomed, it left deep, unresolved questions for what the fuck had just happened and how they were meant to move forward. So you can imagine what a complicated situation football now became for a nation that has just shattered all sense of patriotism. West Germany wasn't even allowed at the 1950 World Cup, banned as an Axis power the same as Japan. Their first post-war international match wasn't until 1950, and by 1954 they hadn't played a single intercontinental match. They had no professional league and had a national team built out of semi-professionals. Their best player, Fritz Walter, had just spent time in a prisoner of war camp, and I want to take a quick detour to talk about him because the fact that he returned to West Germany is so fucking insane to me. So he was drafted in 1942, and by the end of the war, a then 24-year-old Walter was in a prisoner of war camp. In the camp, he actually played football with some of the Slavic and Hungarian guards. And it turns out this interaction would actually save his life. So when the Soviets arrived at the camp, they took all of the Germans back to gulags in the Soviet Union, which was, virtually a death sentence. All but Walter. One of the Hungarian guards who had seen Walter play for Germany before the war told the guards that he wasn't German and was actually from Saarland, which resulted in him and his brother being spared. They were taken off the list, they were not sent to the gulags, they were free. But if you think that was hard, he then got malaria and nearly died. So by the time he returned in 1945, he was very, very, very lucky to be alive. He was recalled to the national team by Sepp Herberger in 1951 and named the captain, with his brother Ottmar also being named in the team, making them the first brothers to ever play in a World Cup winning team together. Spoiler alert. On the other side of the pitch stands the greatest football team the world had ever seen. Hungary's golden team. And when I say great, I really mean it. So between June 1950 and July 1954, Hungary maintained an unbeaten run of 31 consecutive matches. Undefeated in this decade, 167 goals with only 19 conceded. On November 25, 1953, 7 months before the World Cup, Hungary came to Wembley and beat England 6-3. They were the first continental European side to ever defeat England on home soil. The match was called the Match of the Century. It wasn't hyperbole. The English press didn't know how else to write about it because they just didn't have the language. Nothing in their football experience had prepared them for what they had just watched. And then 6 months later in Budapest, Hungary, they beat England again 7-1. Then the World Cup starts, they come to Switzerland and beat West Germany 8-3 in the group stage. Statistically, mathematically, historically, they were the best team ever assembled. For context, and this is going to sound familiar, after the war, Hungary's communist regime nationalized sport, dedicating massive resources to football as a way of glorifying themselves on the world stage. The same logic as Mussolini, the same logic as Hitler, sport as ideology, the national football team as national advertisement. The best players in Hungary were conscripted into the army and assigned to the Hungarian army team, which received a steady stream of the country's most talented players. These players were military men. They were training full-time with army-level discipline while the state paid their salaries. On a technicality, they were officially amateurs, as were all the Eastern Bloc athletes under communist rules, which prohibited professionalism on ideological grounds. But in practice, they were the most professional footballers in the world at the time. State-funded, full-time, scientifically prepared, they were the best. They actually prepared for the 1953 match in England by training with heavier balls than they used in England, on a pitch with the exact dimensions of Wembley. They were studying the opponents, innovating tactics, and building a team's chemistry by making club teammates into international teammates. It was, by any definition, professional football disguised as amateur football. And this regime needed them to win, not just at the World Cup, everywhere, all the time. A victory for Hungary was a victory for communism. That is how they saw it, which meant that a defeat wasn't just a loss, but it was a full-blown political crisis, which makes what happens next really, really fucking dangerous. But before we get into the Battle of Bern, we need to talk about Ferenc Puskás. Not only did Hungary have the best team in the world going into the 1954 World Cup, but they also had the best player. This man was football royalty before football royalty even existed. He went on to score 84 goals in 85 matches for Hungary in his career. He was the man to beat, and the opposition knew it. But then in the group stage, disaster strikes. In their game against West Germany, defender Werner Liebrich kicks Puskás in the ankle, forcing him off the field with a hairline ankle fracture. At this point, you would just assume that his World Cup is over. And you know what? I'm going to let you assume that for a little bit longer. We'll get back to him. Before the final, 1954 produced one of the most violent matches in World Cup history. So it's Hungary versus Brazil, the best in the world against the team that lost in the last World Cup in a match that they only needed a draw in to win. This was Brazil's chance at redemption. They were the most technically brilliant team outside of Europe. If anyone could beat Hungary, it was probably them. And Hungary didn't have Puskás. This game would go down in history as the Battle of Bern. The game starts and Hungary take the lead in the 3rd minute. 4 minutes later, they score again. Just before halftime, Brazil gets a penalty and they make it 2-1. So Jalmar Santos, the man who took that pen, later said it was one of the worst moments of his career. Nobody wanted to take that pen. That gives you a bit of an idea of just how tense it was. And considering the last guy to fuck up Brazil's chances at a World Cup was literally exiled for the rest of his life, you can understand why he might have been a little bit stressed. In the second half, Hungary score again off the back of a penalty. It's 3-1. Then there's a pitch invasion. Not by fans, but by Brazilian journos and coaching staff. The invasion was so full on that Swiss police had to come in and intervene. After this moment, the match became fucking brutal. Violent fouls, cynical tackles, then there's another goal by Brazil, and then another fight, resulting in each team having a player sent off. Hungary go on to score one more, making it 4-2. In the final minutes, Brazil's Humberto Tosi gets a red card for kicking one of the Hungarian players. In the end, there are 3 red cards, 42 free kicks, and 2 penalties. And if you thought it stopped at the final whistle, you are wrong. So a Brazilian player was then hit with a bottle that was allegedly thrown by Puskás, who was in the stands. Brazilian players then invaded the Hungarian dressing room, more fights break out on the pitch, the Hungarian coach needs stitches in his face, and ultimately guns needed to be drawn by security guards to calm the situation down. Ultimately, FIFA did nothing to penalise either country for their actions on that day. Then in the semi-final, Hungary beat Uruguay, the reigning world champions, unbeaten in World Cup matches since 1930. 4-2 after extra time. This was the first time a non-South American team had ever defeated Uruguay in a World Cup match. Hungary were through to the final, having beaten Uruguay and Brazil, the 2 best South American sides, and having already beaten West Germany 8-3. Puskás hadn't played any of these games either. He still had a fractured ankle, and no normal man would have laced up the boots for the final. But Puskás wasn't going to miss his chance at a World Cup. He played anyway. Okay, so now I'm going to take a really quick detour to talk about our boy, Adi Dassler. I'm going to do a full episode on the Dassler brothers that'll probably come out next week, but I feel like I need to do a quick introduction here. So Adi Dassler was born in 1900 in a small Franconian town about 20 kilometers from Nuremberg. His brother Rudolf joined the family business in 1923, and together they registered the Dassler Brothers Sports Shoe Factory, operating from a former washroom with manual electricity generation. They were literally riding bikes to power the electricity. It's crazy. By 1930, the Dasslers were supplying boots to the German national athletics team. And at the 1936 Berlin Olympics, the same games where Hitler was staging his propaganda showcase and Ramey was walking through the swastika-lined streets, Adi met Jesse Owens. So Owens goes on to win 4 gold medals, and whether he was actually wearing Dassler spikes is still debated, but the association existed, and the Dassler brothers were gonna use it. Both brothers joined the Nazi Party for business contacts, they said. The war came and the factory switched from making boots to making anti-tank weapons. And the relationship between the brothers collapsed during the war. The exact cause of their rift is still somewhat unknown, but we do know that they never got over it. In 1948, the brothers split and Adi founded Adidas, a contraction of his nickname and his surname. Rudolf then goes on to found Puma. And the town is literally divided. Adidas on one side of the river, Puma on the other. Workers choose sides. Families were split. If you think your family had drama, you don't know the half of what they were dealing with. 2 brothers, 2 factories, 1 small German town, and a feud so strong it outlasted both of them. Adi Dassler never spoke to his brother again. Rudolf died in 1974, and Adi died 4 years later. They are buried in the same cemetery at opposite ends, the furthest they could possibly be from each other. But back to the World Cup. So by 1950, Adi had been traveling with the West German national squad for years, sitting behind the manager and adjusting players' shoes mid-game. He had spent the last 6 years of his life preparing specifically for this tournament. This was Germany's return to the World Cup, and he was the secret weapon. His boots were lighter than anything the Hungarians were wearing, and now, with the pitch turning to mud and the final about to begin, he had one more advantage up his sleeve. Enter the screw-in stud. Unlike boots with traditional fixed leather studs, Dassler's shoes allowed spikes with various lengths to be affixed depending on the state of the pitch. On a dry pitch, you would use short studs, much like a normal football boot. But on a muddy pitch turning worse by the minute, you could screw in longer studs. Simple. Obvious. But nobody had ever done it at this level before. So the Hungarians' boots were fixed. And as the pitch deteriorated, their studs that were designed for firm ground packed with mud and became dead weight. The longer German spikes emerged clean from the turf with every stride. The Hungarian boots became heavier and heavier with every minute, while the Germans basically skipped through the pitch with their lightweight boots. This was a massive advantage. So the final takes place on July 4, 1954. 62,500 people pack out the stadium, blissfully unaware that they would be about to witness perhaps the greatest match in World Cup history. If you were unsure about Puskás' fitness to play in this game, he would silence the haters just 6 minutes in, scoring the opening goal and setting the Hungarians up for what would hopefully be an easy win. Or so he thought. They back it up again 2 minutes later. We are not even 10 minutes into this game and West Germany is already down 2-0. But they were not going to let that get them down. They fought back. One in the 10th minute and another in the 18th. By 20 minutes into the match, the scores were level once again. At this point, the rain still hasn't stopped and the pitch is deteriorating fast. The German keeper Toni Turek makes a save that commentators called that of a, quote, football god. In the 84th minute, Helmut Rahn receives the ball and is ready to score his second goal of this game. He shoots, he scores, the score is 3-2. West Germany are winning. But the game is still not done. Puskás is still pushing, even with his broken ankle. This man will not give up. In the 89th minute, he shoots, he scores, but then the whistle blows. English ref William Ling calls it offside and the Hungarians are livid. Eyewitness accounts differ on whether he was onside, and the footage doesn't show clearly which position he was in when the ball was passed. So nobody will ever really know if that goal was offside. But all that matters is that it was called offside. The final whistle blows, West Germany 3, Hungary 2. You could call this the most improbable result in World Cup history, but then again, Brazil did lose the last World Cup when they only needed to draw. A Hungarian radio commentator burst into tears, telling his listeners, quote, "Dear listeners, it is hard for me to say anything, believe me. But let's recognize that the West Germans were very fair and won deservedly. We have been unbeaten for 4 years, and now we have lost. This is not a tragedy, my listeners. This is a defeat in a football match." This was a really, really big deal for Germany. People are celebrating in the streets, shouting, quote, "Germany is something again." This is the symbol of Germany's recovery from the war. West Germany had been banned from the previous World Cup. Their players were semi-professionals, and their best player literally nearly died in a Soviet prisoner of war camp. They hadn't beat Hungary in years. And in just 90 minutes of football in the pouring rain in Switzerland, modern-day Germany was born. But there's a part of the story that I haven't told you yet. And this didn't come out for years. So in 1954, when the West German footballers were preparing for the World Cup, they accepted injections of what they were told were vitamin concoctions. Within months of their victory over Hungary, many players had fallen seriously ill. So the players had all been dosed with the same medication and shared the same needle and syringe. This was obviously pre-AIDS crisis. Winger Richard Herman died of cirrhosis at age 39, just 8 years later. So in 2008, the German Olympic Committee commissioned a report with 800 pages researched over 3 years. And this report found indications that the injections were not vitamins, but were pervitin, a powerful methamphetamine that boosts stamina and energy. They were given meth. So Pervitin was not a new substance. It had been issued to German soldiers during World War II called Panzer chocolate or fighter chocolate. So there were 35 million doses given out in the war, and it was marked as an energy booster and sold over the counter until the late 30s. Everybody was using it, from students to housewives. Everybody was on meth for some reason. By 1954, there were still large quantities available in Germany. So the same drug that was used to keep soldiers awake during the worst atrocities known to mankind was also used to keep footballers going through 90 minutes of mud in Bern. So was it doping? Not officially. There were no anti-doping tests in 1954 and no substances were banned. There were no procedures, and technically nobody said they couldn't do meth. The other question to be asked is, did the players know? The evidence suggests that most of them didn't. Did it change the result? We don't really know. So team doctor Franz Lugan, who was 88 years old by the time the study had been done in 2000, said that he injected the Germans with vitamin C and glucose, substances that could not be considered doping. But the Humboldt University report disagrees. So I'll leave it up to you. Do you believe the 50-year-old memory of an 88-year-old doctor who allegedly gave people meth, or the university study commissioned by the people being accused of giving people meth? I'll leave that one up to you to decide. So after the defeat, the Hungarian public were devastated. Despite being under communist rule, masses marched through the streets in Budapest in protest. The coach who had built the greatest team in football history was dismissed and never allowed to manage the national team again. The communist regime needed someone to blame, and he was it. There was a strong trend back then of just blaming the first guy that you looked at. So Hungary kept playing and they kept winning. For another 18 months, they played at the same extraordinary level, losing only one more time before 1956. And then in October 1956, the Hungarian people launched a revolution against Soviet occupation. The revolution initially succeeded, and then the Soviets retaliated. The core of the Golden Team were on tour in Western Europe when it happened. So when the revolution was crushed, a bunch of players decided not to go home, Puskás being one of them. They ended up staying in the West and they faced the consequences. So Puskás was banned by FIFA for 2 years under political pressure from Hungary. Then he went to Real Madrid. He lost the weight and became arguably the greatest goal scorer in the history of club football. Pretty good for a guy that was apparently an overweight has-been. Hungarian football has never reached the heights of that Golden Team again. The revolution that ended their era also scattered the players who might have built the next one. So what did this World Cup mean for Adi Dassler in the end? So Herberger publicly praised Dassler as a key contributor to the West German victory. Adidas's fame skyrocketed, both in West Germany, where this win was considered a key part of like the post-war restoring national self-esteem, and abroad, where viewers of the first televised World Cup were introduced to the ultimate breakthrough in football technology. That is all it took. One World Cup final that was televised for the first time in history, and now Adidas is a global brand. They didn't have celebrity endorsements, they didn't have massive marketing budgets. It was one cobbler, a set of muddy boots, and an idea to stick some metal studs in the bottom of it. So you're probably wondering what happened to those boots. Those boots that won the Miracle of Bern are now in a Berlin museum. One of 6 sculptures erected in the city in 2006 to celebrate the World Cup celebrates, quote, the modern football boot and the man who made it. His name is on that sculpture, which I imagine is like the ultimate fuck you to his brother Rudy, whose name is not on a sculpture. Between 1950 and 1954, the World Cup produced 2 of the greatest upsets in football history, back to back. First, we have Uruguay silencing 200,000 Brazilians in Brazil. Then we have West Germany coming back from 2-0 down against the greatest team ever assembled, with a little bit of help from Adi Dassler and potentially meth. Both results mean more than just football. The result in 1950 broke Brazil's national identity and forced them to rebuild it. And then the Miracle of Bern gave West Germany something they hadn't had since long before the war. The right to say, we are something again. A sense of national pride that was separated from a deeply complex, traumatic, and evil past. As for the Golden Team, they never won a World Cup. They are still considered by many historians to be the greatest international side ever assembled. But they would never get their flowers. Their best players ended up scattered across Europe by a revolution. Their coach was disgraced by the regime he had served, and their legacy is frozen in time. Puskás went on to Madrid and scored more goals than anyone could count. He didn't end up going home to Hungary until 1981, 25 years after leaving. And when he went home, they named the stadium in Budapest in his honor. The next episode, as you'd expect, follows the same pattern. Everything we know about football is about to be changed. It's Sweden, 1958, and there is a 17-year-old Brazilian boy named Pelé.